Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Dune. This movie tells the story of a brilliant and gifted young man born into a great destiny beyond his understanding. He must travel to the most dangerous planet in the universe to ensure the future of his family and his people. Will he succeed on his journey? Let's find out in Dune. Dune begins by showing a girl named Chani, a native of the planet Arrakis, commonly called Fremen. Arrakis is an arid and barren planet, and only filled with expanses of desert. However, Arrakis has a natural wealth worth more than anything else, namely the spice. The spice is a spice that is believed to increase endurance and prolong human life. Because of the abundance of the spice, many parties only want to profit from the natural wealth of Arrakis but never think about the welfare of the indigenous people there and always oppress the Fremen. Chani says that Arrakis has been colonized by the House of Harkonnen for more than 80 years, even before she was born. Led by Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the noble family made a massive expansion on Arrakis. They were able to generate wealth that even exceeded the wealth of the imperial family. It didn't stop there. The Harkonnen also often oppressed the natives of Arrakis. The Fremen tried to put up a fight, but Rabban, Baron Harkonnen's nephew who was also the leader of the elite forces of the House of Harkonnen, always managed to subdue their resistance. One day, Emperor Caladan IV ordered that the rule of the House of Harkonnen in Arrakis had ended and asked Baron Harkonnen to withdraw his troops from Arrakis. Chani and the other residents did not immediately feel relieved after the Harkonnen left their planet. Chani firmly believed that the Emperor would bestow the dominion of Arrakis and the fate of the Fremen on another noble family who might not be better than the Harkonnen, who only exploited their natural wealth and oppressed the Fremens. The scene then switches to showing a planet called Caladan, the homeworld for the noble family of the House of Atreides, led by Duke Leto. Leto had a son named Paul who would later become the heir and future leader of the House of Atreides. One morning, Paul wakes up after having a very strange dream in which he sees a girl he doesn't know, but feels so familiar with. Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, asks him not to underestimate his dream because it could be a vision that foretells future events. Lady Jessica said that because she was a member of Bene Gesserit, which is an exclusive sisterhood whose members have the special ability to control other people verbally called the Voice. Many people think of Bene Gesserit as a group of witches, but in fact, the members of Bene Gesserit have trained their bodies and minds for years to acquire superhuman powers and abilities that seem miraculous to others. Therefore, Lady Jessica always asks Paul to keep practicing every day to master the ability of the Voice. Lady Jessica also firmly believes that Paul has the potential and strength to bring about big changes to the world. One day, the Imperial delegation visited the planet Caladan to deliver the decree of Emperor Caladan IV assigning Duke Leto to replace Baron Harkonnen as ruler of Arrakis. Duke Leto accepts his new assignment as ruler of Arrakis and promises to rule with justice and bring peace to the planet, as well as mining spices for the common good. During the meeting, Jessica noticed that one of the members of Bene Gesserit who had come with the Imperial delegation was constantly observing Paul with an expression that was difficult to predict. After the Imperial delegation left the planet Caladan, Leto immediately sent several Special Forces members to Arrakis to investigate the situation on the planet before he and his family moved there. Paul then approached one of the members of the Special Force who were going to Arrakis named Duncan Idaho, who was also his mentor and best friend. Paul warns Duncan that he saw his death in Arrakis in his dreams. However, Duncan seems unconcerned about it and assures Paul that he will be fine because he is a great soldier. While walking with his father in the hills, Paul asks his father if he can go to Arrakis with Duncan. But Leto immediately refused because it was too dangerous for Paul, who is the sole heir to the House of Atreides in the future, to go to Arrakis at this time. Leto then explained that the Emperor might have arranged a scenario for the Atreides to go to war with the Harkonnen in Arrakis, since most noble families wanted the House of Atreides to assume power as Emperor or Supreme Emperor. Leto added that the purpose of sending Duncan and company to the planet Arrakis was to infiltrate the Fremen's village and try to ally with them to increase strength should the Emperor's and the Harkonnen's forces attack the House of Atreides in Arrakis. Not only that, Leto also wanted to free the Fremen from the occupation that had made them suffer. Paul seemed to think about his father's words for a moment and understood his father's concern for him and the future of the House of Atreides. Therefore, Paul was determined to improve his fighting skills by taking martial arts training taught by his mentor, Gurney Halleck. While doing close combat training, Paul and Gurney use a special bracelet that instantly activates a special armor, which will cover the entire body so that it is not easily injured. Although it has not been effective in preventing death and serious injury, the protector can minimize these risks. After training, Paul seems happy that he managed to take down Gurney, who is physically bigger than him. Gurney then warns Paul not to let his guard down and continue increasing his vigilance while on Arrakis. He is very sure that the Harkonnen must have planned something to harm Duke Leto and his family, especially Paul, who is the only future of the House of Atreides. Meanwhile, on the planet GD Prime, the homeworld of the House of Harkonnen, Baron Harkonnen is discussing the Emperor's decision to assign Duke Leto Atreides to succeed him as ruler of Arrakis, along with his nephew, Glossu Rabban, and his advisor, Peter de Vries. Rabban looked furious because he thought the Emperor had sided with the Atreides family, but Baron Harkonnen didn't seem worried about the Emperor's decision because in reality, Duke Leto Atreides' assignment to the planet Arrakis was only the beginning of the grand plan he had prepared. That night, Lady Jessica secretly wakes Paul and asks her son to get ready. After that, she ordered Dr. Yue to check Paul's vital condition. She then asked Paul to enter a room where Gaius Helen Mohiam, one of the Reverend Mother Bene Gesserit, was waiting for the young man. The purpose of Helen's arrival there was to find out if Paul Atreides was the chosen one they had been waiting for. Helen then tells Paul to put his hand in a box, where it is lethal. Helen was quite impressed that Paul was able to pass the test, which meant that he had tremendous potential for strength, but it was not certain whether he was really the chosen one. After Helen leaves, Lady Jessica explains to Paul that all this time Bene Gesserit has been controlling the Empire from behind the shadows by arranging several bloodlines to give birth to a chosen one who has tremendous power and has great potential to bring peace to the entire planet, including Arrakis. However, unbeknownst to Paul, Jessica was actually assigned by Bene Gesserit to give birth to a daughter, but she deliberately chose to bear a son as the only heir to Duke Leto Atreides. Long story short, Duke Leto Atreides and his family finally arrived on Arrakis. Unexpectedly, the Atreides family received a fairly warm welcome from the Fremen, especially to Paul, who they believed to be a messiah figure who could bring peace and prosperity to the Fremen people and also Arrakis. Paul doesn't fully understand it yet. For that, Paul diligently learns everything about the Fremen people, the spice, and also the planet Arrakis. One of them is to learn the technique of the Fremen people to avoid attacks from giant sandworms. The giant sandworm can grow up to 400 meters long and devour anything within its reach. Sandworms are very attracted to sound, so the Fremens usually perform a special technique that will imitate the sound of sand rustling when they are walking on the desert sand. When Paul was focusing on his studies, suddenly a killer insect appeared about to attack him, but he managed to catch the insect and reported the incident to his father. After conducting an investigation, it turned out that the insect came from one of the Harkonnen soldiers who was willing to be buried behind a wall to carry out his mission to kill the heir to the House of Atreides. Leto, who was furious over the incident that almost took his son's life, ordered his advisor named Thufir Hawat to conduct a thorough investigation and ensure his family's safety, especially Paul, while they were there on Arrakis. Meanwhile, Helen, the Emperor's truthsayer, goes to Baron Harkonnen to deliver a message from the Emperor in which the Emperor has agreed to send Sardakar's troops as assistants to the House of Harkonnen, who will attack the House of Atreides on Arrakis. The Emperor orders Baron Harkonnen to exterminate the Atreides family lineage, but Helen asks Baron not to kill Paul and Jessica because they are part of the Bene Gesserit. Baron agreed to Helen's request, but he didn't seem to really want any descendants left from the House of Atreides after she left. After the incident with the killer insects, Paul is then invited by his father to attend an important meeting with Gurney and Duncan, who brings along a Fremen named Stilgar. Stilgar is the leader of the Fremen tribe inhabiting the Sietch Tabor area, the area where Duncan and the Special Forces live to mingle with the Fremen. Without further ado, Leto then expressed his desire to cooperate with the Fremen and promised not to carry out any oppression or other cruel acts like what the Harkonnen did when they occupied Arrakis. Even though Stilgar seemed to agree to cooperate, he didn't seem to believe Leto's words just like that. Long story short, Leto and Paul plan to monitor workers harvesting the spice in the desert. But before that, they meet a female imperial ecologist and judge of change in Arrakis named Dr. Liat Kynes. The woman was in charge of inspecting the special Fremen-made clothes that Leto and Paul would wear in the desert. Dr. Liat Kynes seemed to be muttering something while checking Paul's clothes, where she was quite impressed that Paul wore them as the Fremens wore them, as if Paul had been part of the Fremens for a very long time. By using a plane resembling a dragonfly, Leto and his entourage are finally able to find a machine harvesting the spice in the middle of the desert. However, after looking in another direction, they detected the movement of a giant sandworm heading towards the machine. Unfortunately, the transportation equipment was damaged when they were about to lift and move the machine to a safe place. Without thinking, Leto immediately ordered the evacuation of all workers inside the machine using an airplane. Paul and Gurney descend directly into the desert and lead the evacuation of the workers because their time is running out and the giant sandworm is moving very fast. However, while in the middle of the desert, Paul accidentally inhaled the spice, which instantly sharpened the power of his subconscious. causing him to enter the subconscious and have visions of Chani and also of his mother holding a baby blue eyes like the Fremen's. Because Paul almost collapsed due to the influence of the spice, Gurney swiftly helped him and immediately took him away to the plane because the giant sandworm was getting closer. After a strenuous run on the sand, the two of them finally reached the plane that took off right away, just before a giant sandworm arrived and devoured the machine used to harvest the spice. Arriving home, Paul then told his mother about his vision while inhaling the spice in the desert. Hearing this, Lady Jessica then felt scared because blue eyes were a characteristic of the Fremen people and a sign that someone had inhaled a large amount of the spice because they had lived long enough in the desert. Jessica had already thought about the worst that would happen to her, Paul and also the House of Atreides, soon. That night, Leto realized that one of the guards had been attacked, and when he was about to warn the rest of Atreides' army, suddenly his body was stung by a deadly insect which instantly paralyzed his defenses and made his body immobile. It turns out that this was deliberately done by Dr. Yue, who was forced to betray his master because Baron Harkonnen had imprisoned his wife. Dr. Yue had also turned off Atreides' defense system so that Harkonnen and Sardakar's troops could enter Arrakis territory undetected. Dr. Yue intends to take Leto to see Baron Harkonnen in exchange for his wife's safety for the Dukes. Even so, Yue replaced Leto's teeth with dentures filled with poison that would instantly spread into the air and kill anyone who inhaled it within a certain distance. He hopes that Leto could kill Baron Harkonnen when he approaches him. Without taking long, Harkonnen's troops immediately attacked the House of Atreides with a crushing attack because Atreides' troops were not ready for the attack due to the sabotage of Dr. Yue. However, Gurney still mobilized all his troops to fight Harkonnen's troops with all his might. Duncan, who noticed an attack from the Harkonnen, immediately rushed to find the whereabouts of Duke Leto, Paul and Lady Jessica, but the three were nowhere to be found. Since Harkonnen's forces had occupied Atreides' base in Arrakis, Duncan quickly fled. Meanwhile, Paul and Lady Jessica, who were captured by Harkonnen's troops, managed to break free using the power of the voice which caused the Harkonnen troops to attack each other. Paul and his mother intend to return to the Atreides base, but the place has become a battlefield. The two of them decided to hide in the desert with makeshift equipment. Because he is in the middle of a desert rich in the spice, Paul again gets visions of himself being involved in a great war that will determine the universe's fate in the future. Seeing Paul, who was afraid of the big fate that was waiting for him, Jessica then hugged him and calmed him down. On the other hand, Baron Harkonnen and his army had already entered Atreides' base and intended to kill Leto. But before that, Yue asked Baron Harkonnen to release his wife because he had done everything the Baron wanted, even if he had to betray Leto. It turned out that Baron Harkonnen only took advantage of Yue and then killed him. When Baron Harkonnen approached Leto, he instantly released the poison in his dentures into the air and in an instant, killed everyone in the room. But Baron Harkonnen was still able to save himself by activating his shield. After Paul and his mother came out of hiding, they met Duncan and Dr. Lyakines, who took them to an old research station to hide. However, it didn't take long for Sardakar's troops to find in the facility where Duncan was finally willing to sacrifice his own life to protect Paul and Jessica, as Paul had seen in his dream before coming to Arrakis. Dr. Lyakines then took Paul and his mother to escape from there, but there was only one plane left and she asked Paul and Jessica to escape using the plane, while she would stop the Sardakar troops who were chasing them. Outside the facility, Lyakines ignites a device called a thumper that can provoke the arrival of a giant sandworm. But unfortunately, she was killed by Sardakar's troops, who ended up being eaten alive by the giant sandworm. Meanwhile, Paul and his mother, who were trying to escape from the pursuit of Sardakar's plane, were desperate to steer their plane into a violent sandstorm. Paul made it through the sandstorm with his abilities, though his plane was damaged and they ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere. Paul and his mother try to survive in the middle of the desert with minimal supplies. When Paul was trying to find Stilgar based on the information he had heard from Duncan, suddenly a giant sandworm came towards them because he was attracted by the Fremen sand trap that they accidentally activated. Paul and his mother tried to save themselves from being chased by a giant sandworm that finally revealed its form to the ground. They were almost eaten by a giant sandworm, but someone in the distance lit a thumper to distract the sandworm and they both survived. It turned out that it was Stilgar and his troops who just happened to live nearby. Stilgar recognizes Paul from his meeting with Duke Leto Atreides and agrees to let him live in Syke Tabor. But not so with Lady Jessica, who he considers a weak woman. But Lady Jessica managed to break the notion of weak women after knocking out Stilgar in close combat. Shortly after, Paul finally meets Chani, the Fremen girl, in his vision. Stilgar's decision to allow Paul and Lady Jessica to live with the Fremens apparently met with opposition from a Fremen soldier named Jamis, who challenged Paul to a duel ritual of the Fremens. They both had to fight each other to the death. At first, Paul was reluctant to accept the challenge because he had never killed anyone in his life. However, he was forced to carry out the challenge to fulfill his destiny in the future. After a fairly fierce battle, Paul was finally able to kill Jamis. Because Paul is willing to meet challenges and successfully complete them very well, the Fremen, including Chani, have great respect for the heir Atreides, who they believe can bring peace and prosperity on the planet Arrakis. While on their way to the Fremen settlement, Paul and Lady Jessica looked amazed to see a young Fremen surfing in the middle of the desert riding a sandworm the size of a train as a foothold. Chani said that it was the beginning, where she implied that there were still many other great things that Fremens could do when the film ended.